Most people think rising electricity bills are just another side effect of inflation. But what if that's not the real reason? What if the truth is, the entire energy system we depend on is quietly reaching its limits? Over the past few years, energy prices have been climbing across the world. Not just in one country, not just in one region, but almost everywhere. And the strange thing is, experts keep saying it's temporary. Temporary shortages, temporary demand, temporary disruptions. But if it's temporary, why do prices keep rising year after year? Why do more and more families feel like their electricity bill is becoming one of their biggest monthly expenses? Something deeper may be happening behind the scenes. Because the uncomfortable truth is this: the modern world is becoming more dependent on electricity than ever before, while the systems producing that electricity are aging, strained, and struggling to keep up. And if that trend continues, energy might not just become expensive, it could become unpredictable. To understand why energy prices keep rising, we need to look at something most people rarely think about: how the electricity system actually works. Electricity doesn't just appear when we flip a switch. It has to be generated, transported through massive infrastructure, and delivered in real time to millions of homes and businesses. The problem is that much of this infrastructure was built decades ago, when the world used far less electricity than it does today. Over the last 20 years, our dependence on electricity has exploded. Think about how many things in your home now rely on power: computers, smart devices, electric vehicles, air conditioning systems, data centers, streaming services, and an endless number of digital tools that didn't even exist a generation ago. All of this demand puts enormous pressure on the power grid. At the same time, maintaining and upgrading that grid has become more expensive. Power plants are aging. Transmission lines require constant maintenance, and energy production is increasingly affected by global fuel prices, environmental regulations, and geopolitical tensions. When all of these factors combine, the result is simple: the cost of producing and delivering electricity keeps going up. And when that happens, the extra cost doesn't disappear. It eventually reaches the consumer. That's why many people are starting to notice something that used to feel rare: electricity bills that seem to climb higher every single year, even when their usage stays almost the same. And for a growing number of households, that raises a serious question. If the cost of energy keeps rising, how long can people realistically keep depending entirely on the grid? For many people, the realization doesn't come from reading energy reports or following global economic news. It usually happens in a much simpler way. It happens the moment they open their electricity bill and notice that something doesn't make sense anymore. At first, they assume it must be a mistake. Maybe they used more electricity that month. Maybe the weather was colder or hotter than usual. Maybe the utility company adjusted its rates temporarily. But then the same thing happens again the next month, and then again a few months later. Gradually, the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. What used to feel like a normal monthly expense begins to feel unpredictable. Across many countries, families are starting to talk about the same concern. People are noticing that even when they try to reduce their electricity usage, the bills still seem to rise over time. Turning off lights earlier, lowering the thermostat, unplugging devices, these small efforts sometimes help, but they rarely solve the bigger issue. The truth is that the modern home is built around electricity. Nearly every essential system depends on it. Refrigeration, heating, cooling, communication, internet access, and even basic daily routines all rely on a stable flow of power coming from somewhere outside the home. And that realization has caused many people to start asking a different question. Instead of simply wondering how to reduce their energy usage, they begin wondering whether it is possible to become less dependent on the traditional power grid altogether. In recent years, this idea has slowly moved from a fringe concept into something more mainstream. More homeowners are exploring alternative ways to generate or supplement their own energy. Some invest in solar panels. Others look into backup power systems or small-scale energy projects that allow them to produce at least part of the electricity their home needs. The goal is not necessarily to disconnect from the grid entirely. For most people, that would be unrealistic. Instead, the goal is to regain a sense of control, to reduce vulnerability to rising prices and unpredictable changes in the energy market. Because once people start looking at the situation from that perspective, they begin to realize something important. Relying entirely on a single energy source, controlled by large external systems, can make households extremely exposed to changes they have no influence over. And that's exactly why interest in alternative energy ideas has grown so rapidly over the last few years. As more people begin to question their dependence on the traditional power grid, a quiet shift in mindset has started to take place. Instead of seeing electricity as something that can only come from large power companies, many homeowners are beginning to explore the idea that energy can also be generated on a much smaller, more personal scale. Not necessarily to replace the grid entirely, but to reduce how much control rising prices have over their daily lives. The idea itself isn't new. In fact, small-scale energy solutions have existed for decades. But until recently, most people assumed that generating electricity at home required massive investments, complicated installations, or expensive equipment that only specialists could handle. What's changing now is access to information. Thanks to the internet, more people are discovering that there are actually a variety of ways individuals have experimented with producing small amounts of energy on their own. Some methods involve simple mechanical principles, others rely on alternative energy concepts, and many are designed specifically to be built at home using relatively basic materials. For many families, the goal isn't necessarily to eliminate their electricity bill overnight. That would be unrealistic. Instead, the goal is something much simpler and more practical: to reduce dependence on a system that seems to be getting more expensive and less predictable every year. And that shift in thinking has led to a growing curiosity about different types of home energy projects. Some people are experimenting with small solar setups. Others are researching backup battery systems or learning about alternative designs that attempt to generate electricity in unconventional ways. The motivation behind all of these efforts is the same. People want to feel like they have at least some degree of control over their own energy situation. During my own research into this topic, I came across an interesting project that has been circulating online called the Energy Revolution System. It's essentially a guide that claims to show how a small, self-built energy device can be assembled using common materials and simple instructions. Now, to be clear, I'm not saying this is some kind of magical solution or that it will replace your entire electricity supply. Every home and every situation is different. But what caught my attention is that many people are looking into ideas like this simply because they want to understand whether there are practical ways to become a little less dependent on the traditional grid. For anyone who is curious about alternative energy concepts and how some individuals are trying to reduce their reliance on rising electricity prices, it might at least be worth seeing how these systems work. If you're interested, I've left a link in the comments where you can take a closer look at the Energy Revolution System and decide for yourself whether it's something worth exploring. At the very least, learning about different approaches to home energy may help you think differently about how much control you really have over one of the most essential resources in modern life.